checklist to make sure all my stuff was taken care of.
Sammy, what are you doing, man?
I'm just all over the place.
Good thing this is all pre-recording.
Yeah.
He'll fix it in post.
I'll fix it in post. We have 0 viewers right now, so it's all good.
Awesome.
We're on a great start here. All right, gotta find that tweet that I had prepared and then didn't. Live now. Here it is. Sending it to. All right, cool. Live now tweet has been sent. And we can begin. Thanks for joining us once again. I'm Sammy K. Powers, and this is the PHP Roundtable. This is a live podcast of developers discussing topics that PHP nerds care about. The ultimate goal of this podcast is to learn a little something from each other. If you're listening live and want to be a part of the show, send a tweet to PHP Roundtable with a question, and we'll try to get your question answered on the show if we can. There's a silent threat to the PHP ecosystem, the bus factor. I feel like it should have some theme music behind it. In software development, a project's bus factor is measured by the amount of developers responsible for keeping the project alive. If a project has only one maintainer, for example, and that person gets hit by a bus, that person's project will most likely die as well. Although the PHP world has a huge community of amazing people keeping the ecosystem alive and well, there are a few Achilles tendons out there that have a high bus factor that could really negatively impact the overall ecosystem. And that's what we're going to be talking about today with a lively panel. Let's kick this off. I'll introduce each one of you. Let's start it off with Samantha Quiñones, a principal at AOL. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you. Hi.
Hello. Also, we have Davey Shafik. He's a community engineer at Engineered and author of the Zen Certification Study Guide. Welcome, Davey.
Howdy.
And Chris Tankersley. He is the PHP Jack of all trades, Dragonman Tank on Twitter. Hello.
Hello.
And finally joining us, Michelangelo van Dam, DragonBee on Twitter, a PHP consultant for Intuit. I said that right? Intuit. Intuit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I should have made notes about that in the show notes. And he's a community leader at PHP Benelux. Welcome.
Hello, Internet.
Well, I just want to kick this thing off with starting with kind of where this all came from. This entire episode was inspired by something that happened at PHP Tech, which is a conference here in Chicago, a PHP conference, and they have this thing at PHP Tech called Open Spaces. It's kind of like an uncon. It's like one of those things where you just have this little area in a hallway and you just sit around and talk, or you can have like a little presentation, and then it's kind of really informal. It's not set up to be sort of like a really formal, like here's a projector and a bunch of seats, so give a talk kind of thing. So what that kind of did was it generated a roundtable type discussion when Samantha actually put a session on Open Spaces, and it was entitled Open Sourcing Teams. So what was, I think that's what you put on there. What was the original intention of that session for the open sourcing teams?
It was, I don't remember the exact title, something like that. Actually, really, it's an idea that I stole from Liz Smith at Midwest. She did the closing keynote at Midwest PHP, talking about why it's so important to get involved in open source. And one of the things that she brought up that really resonated with me was that a lot of the people who work sort of at the lower layers of the stack, so at the interpreter level, even at the operating system level and lower than that, are aging out of the industry. Right? They're getting older, they're retiring. Sadly, some of the much older people are getting to the end of their lives. So we're left with this kind of large knowledge gap. I'm really self-conscious about bouncing now. With this large knowledge gap, and it represents a real threat to the industry as a whole if we kind of lose that deep institutional knowledge. So it starts kind of at that deep level, but it kind of bubbles up into everything that we do, all of our teams. Like even at the level of an individual team working on a project, there are people on those projects that have so much institutional knowledge that if they were to, let's be a little bit less morbid, not get hit by a bus, but decide to retire or win the lottery and move to the south of France, and take that institutional knowledge with them, then those who are left behind are in trouble. So kind of the idea there was finding ways to open source that knowledge and find better ways to reduce complexity, make things more simple, easier to understand, and also find ways to bring people in into these projects and turn them into new experts.
Cool. And so that's I like what you said about it could also be about winning the lottery, and you can just go off and do something else. So I thought like maybe instead of talking about people dying by being hit by a bus, we could just say that they're doing a table flip, said I'm done with this, and then they go shave their head and eyebrows and be a monk for a month or for a couple years in the mountains of Tibet. So we'll maybe we'll just kind of go with a more of a more of a one where everybody ends up being happy in the end.
Yeah, it was quite alarming how many times that Jordy died sort of attacked. So
yeah,
I'd much
trying
rather
to get a little superstitious about it.
yeah, a little bit creepy. Also, while we're kind of defining things, one other thing that was a little confusing at Tech was the numbers involved. I think everyone agrees that when you have only one person on a project, you have a bus factor of 1. But does adding somebody make that go to 2 or 0.5? Like, is it 0 through 1 or is it 1 plus? And I think you can do both. If it's below 1, then you're in the decimals, obviously, or if it's above, it's ints. So,
well, I think
any preferences on that?
Part of it too depends on like what different people know. Because if you have 10 people on a project, but one person holds any knowledge from the rest of them, that person becomes a bus factor for all of that.
For that thing, yeah.
For that thing, I mean, I've had this problem on internal projects, not even just open source projects, where I've left a job and I've had so much knowledge on individual things that no matter what I do the 2 weeks before to dump that, there's a lot of stuff I know. So
and even though I have vacation and
right,
yeah.
and even though I have coworkers, which I've tried to offload that stuff to, I know that I took stuff with me that I forgot to give them. So you could have 10 people on a project. There's not just a bus factor that's going to take out the project. There's bus factors that can take out individual sections of projects too.
And
so
I
don't
think
even know if you
that's
can
why
have a number. Mm-hmm.
Right, because you can, like, especially in PHP, we see tons of people working on tons of stuff, but at the same time, like, how many of those people that go off to Thailand or whatever, and the project really dies? So I think that is something kind of important to kind of look out for as we're kind of talking about this. What kind of impact are we having when people leave? Actually, and so kind of moving that into specific things in PHP of the ecosystem. I know we're excited to jump on Composer specifically and hitting Jordy, but no, like what about like some specific packages like web frameworks out there? Are there bus factor issues with web frameworks, or do you guys even see them as an issue when you can just switch from one framework to another pretty willy-nilly?
Well, I think if you look at Zen Framework or at Symfony, I mean, I don't want to see MWAP or what's his name? Fabian decide, hey, let's do sculpturing for a change because they're sick of coding. If that occurs, it won't kill the project, but it will suddenly bring a huge blow to its ecosystem, and it will take a lot of time for that ecosystem to recover from one of the major players and architects of that framework to fill in the gap.
Well, you look at something like Laravel with Taylor Otwell. If he leaves, even though he's not the only maintainer, he's a huge chunk of the community and the force behind Laravel. So, will Laravel die if Taylor Otwell leaves? Probably not, but is it going to be the same project?
I think it's much less of an issue with Fabian and MWAP. That's Matthew Garofini for those who aren't aware. I think that ZF1, which basically has Acrobat, Rob Allen, and 2 other people, I think, maintaining it, that would be a huge blow if any of them, I think, left, especially Rob. So I think it kind of depends on where they are in their life cycle, and ZF2 obviously has a lot more people who are involved in the open source project. I think, though, that Matthew does have the most complete picture of how everything goes together and future looking and stuff like that. But I could see like the Rove team stepping in, kind of even as an organization and taking over from MWAP without too much hassle.
Yeah, but you have to think about the complete ecosystem of a project or a business or whatever. Mm-hmm. If a company like let's say AOL, Samantha, if your company decides that the whole upper management, the C-level management, they all go for 1 year vacation to a remote island without connectivity, the business will still continue, but it's going to be tough. I mean, I come from a country where we had no government, and this is also what we call a buzz factor. No government means there is no guidance, there is no direction, there is no decisions making, and it's especially at that point that everyone that has the liberty to move around without boundaries goes like, hey, yeah, well, we don't have to pay taxes because they're not submitting any new taxes. But people who work for the government, who have the dependency on the government, they don't get paid because no one's there to sign off their wages. Nobody gets promoted, or nobody can retire because there is no one to approve the retirement. So you see, there is this ecosystem where a leading role has a potential to be replaced, but it also has a potential to, lock in a whole bunch of people, and that defines what the whole buzz factor is. Basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think to a large extent, like the loss of that strategic vision can really be devastating. And if you think about something like Symfony or ZF2, they have the kind of market penetration that they have because of the strength of the ecosystem behind them, and a lot of that is not just due to the efforts of Fabian and MWAP coding, but also having taking that strategic vision and looking at where the framework is going to be in a year or 18 months and positioning themselves to provide this open source framework that's kind of at a level of quality that companies are going to want to adopt, which draws more people into the community. Right? Because a company adopts Symfony, now you have developers working at that company who learn Symfony, and maybe a fraction of them will start to contribute. So it's kind of a self-sustaining cycle that can fall apart really quickly if you don't have somebody making those sort of strategic plans.
Yeah, and decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So as that affects kind of the project as a whole, how does that affect us as developers? It might change the strategic plan, and so it's not going in the direction it was. But like as an end developer, how does that hurt us?
Well, we're a little bit dependent on these kind of decisions. I mean, if you work with Symfony, or you work with Zen Framework, or you use Composer, or whatever kind of tool that you're using, you build your strategy around it. I mean, I have to architect applications. I need to decide for customers on we are going to use these kind of tools, because these tools will best fit your business requirements. If all of a sudden one of those tools fails, we have made a strategic decision on using that particular tool, and if we cannot continue on using this tool, we're at a block. We need to come up with another solution, or B, we need to start fixing things ourselves and setting up our timeline in a further future than we anticipated. Is this something that we can live with? For us developers, yes, we can. For a business, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think that anytime you choose to use a project, you already have to claim some sort of ownership over it. Like, you have to be very well versed in that project. You have to evaluate it. You have to understand that even if there is not a loss of leadership or talent in the project, it may be that you come across problems that you need to solve that are just for you, that they don't need in the open source side of it. So you need to start maintaining, a fork effectively, or maybe you come across a security bug and you need to fix it immediately. Things like that, So I think you always have to assume ownership, and if there are open source stuff that comes down from upstream, that's kind of a bonus, actually.
Yeah, but you still, I mean, we had it a couple of times that we used a vendor, and the vendor implemented a framework that they created and maintained themselves, and then they decide, oh, we're going to use a more popular framework, and they dropped all support on it. But all of a sudden, yeah, the project was already implemented with my customers, and yeah, how are you going to deal with this? I mean, they're going to charge extra in order to have that framework replaced with the new stuff. That was not calculated in, that was not budgeted for, that was no time set aside for this. These are complicated decisions companies need to make, and sometimes, especially in the past 4 or 5 years, companies really had to struggle in order to keep their heads above the water. I mean, it was not easy for a lot of companies. So when you add this complexity into the mix, it's going to be even worse. And when you have a vendor, I don't want to point fingers, but if you have a vendor like Microsoft, or you have a vendor like IBM, they provide software and you purchase a license. If it's not working for you, yeah, you have this ability to request for support, and they will get you that support depending on how much you pay for support fees, but you will get that support in order to solve the issue. With open source, I think you don't actually have that.
Well, so I think you make those decisions based on the amount of risk you're willing to take, right? So every time you choose an open source project, there are certainly things like Zen Framework. You have Zen behind it. It's an open source project, but there is a vendor, and it doesn't have to be the project itself. For example, don't want to kind of toot my own horn, but like Deus is an open source project, and EngineYard is a support offering for that. Those two don't actually have to be part of the same entity. So those options do exist, and you have to decide as a company to how much risk you're willing to take. Now, I do think that as a contract type position, which is the kind of work that you do, it's definitely a lot more difficult to justify kind of changes and problems that you hit along the road. You've made a decision. You're supposed to be the expert. You should have done your research and seen this coming, kind of thing. And of course, some bus factors you can't even think about. But as a long-running business, you have a lot more freedom to go, oh, we messed up. We now need to spend a month and a half, refactoring this thing out of here, so that we can move on, or we need to spend a month and a half learning everything we can so we can continue to be the maintainers of this project. But yeah, so I mean that also comes into play. So I think it's all about risk. How much risk are you willing to take? If there's no commercial support behind it, then that's more risk than if there is.
Well, but that's exactly what the bus factor is all about. It's about the calculated risk that you are willing to take to use one of these projects, and the what if factor. If something goes wrong or the project stops, what will happen then? And that is, like you said correctly, that is something that I need to keep in mind when I'm advising customers in, oh, you need to go this way or you need to go that way. That's why I'm trying to be at as many conferences and sessions online as possible, just to know what's going on and what's happening in the world, so I at least see things coming.
So let me ask everybody, what is your risk assessment like? What are you doing? What are you taking into account when you're looking at projects?
I know for me, a lot of it has to do with documentation and community. And sometimes those two, if you have really good documentation, sometimes the community is not as needed. But if something doesn't have a very good community, that means there's not very many people working on it, which means there's a much higher risk of that project. If it implodes, I either have to spend the time to refactor it out or I've got to switch to something else. And two, I don't want to be dependent upon an IRC channel or a mailing list or anything just to get general questions answered. So if there's very bad documentation, it makes it much harder for me to want to use a project because I don't know what's going to happen if something does break. Having an IRC channel, having a mailing list and stuff are good for support, but I don't want to have to live in an IRC channel 24 hours a day just to learn how something works in a day-to-day kind of situation. So I think that's usually, if I get good community and good documentation, that's where I will go, and sometimes one can offset the other.
Mm-hmm. Why do I keep reminding of OSCommerce?
I've made fun of OSCommerce many times.
No, but yeah, it was a good community. It had good documentation, and back in the time, it was a good product to work with, especially for e-commerce. And then all of a sudden, it died off, and I even now have a couple of customers that run OSCommerce, and it's very hard to maintain this, especially because the most of the development hasn't evolved into that particular level. Sorry, Samantha, go ahead.
Oh no, I mean I was just gonna say, like, I think that, I don't know, for me I even go a little bit further and actually, you know, looking into the code, because when I incorporate an open source project and something that I'm working on, you know, there's a risk that I'm going to have to basically take on that entire project as technical debt if it's completely abandoned. It's like you said, Chris, you're either stuck refactoring it out of your application and finding something new, or now you own this code. So I'm definitely looking at the code to see, is it something that I feel like I can maintain? Does it follow any type of standards? Is it somewhat simple? Is it overly complex? So kind of the same things that I would look at as kind of reviewing a coworker's code that they were sending on a pull request. It's kind of the same process. So there's definitely, for me at least, a big code quality aspect. So it needs to be well documented, but it also needs to be something that I feel like I can take over without it being a huge economic blow to my team, my company, since we have limited resources. So, you know, there's a big economic decision there.
Mm-hmm.
So to Davey's question, then, the assessment seems to be documentation, code quality, and community. And if one of those things, maybe community, could be a factor to indicate its bus factorability, but the other two probably don't really play much of a role. So it seems to be one of those things that's it's kind of hard to determine, like, whether something's going to be susceptible to the bus factor, simply because, like as we mentioned earlier, if even with a huge community, if only one or two of those people have the knowledge and the foresight to, like, push that project forward, then it still could die along with them being a monk. So that's hard. Is there any way that we can get around that? Is there a better measurement of bus factorability on projects, or making sure that projects don't go the bus factor way?
It's kind of hard because projects they come and go, and we know each other from conferences, but that's about the top 1% that actually goes to these conferences and gets involved. Most of the companies I end up is a whole bunch of developers that have figured out, oh, this is a popular framework, or this is a popular tool that we can use, and they go with this. They don't have the backstory. They just think, oh, this will solve my problem, and they will go with this. And so the reflection between, okay, let's look at the community versus what's being used in companies, from our point of view, it's like, oh yeah, we know what to look for, we know who's behind these kind of projects, but in most of the cases, when the tools are being used or the frameworks are being used, it's not like that. They just go look, okay, what's popular, what's trending, and they will fetch this, whether or not that it has good support or not.
There's a reason that some companies will always DIY. They'll invent it themselves because then they feel like they've eliminated some of that unknown, but of course your own people are also an unknown, and you have your own bust factor at that point. So I don't think that helps. I think an example of a project that, and I don't want to pick on them, but lithium. There was nothing wrong with lithium. I didn't care for some of the idioms, but technically it works and it was good code. And I think we're still waiting on a 1.0 release, and it came out just before 5.3. So we're talking like 10 years or 9 years or something at this point. And the people that worked on it, Jiwoo and Nate Abiley, they're fantastic developers, but that didn't actually give you enough to know whether or not it was viable. And I think that people who picked it probably regret that choice. But not that their code necessarily is stopped working or anything like that, but how do they move forward? How do they continue to evolve their product and their project when the framework itself seems to have stagnated and is no longer being developed, despite all the best intentions? And that's not even a bust factor thing. That's just people getting busy and doing other stuff, right? I mean, yeah, life.
Gary Hawken asked on Twitter, can the panel tell us who they would most like to see hit by the bust factor in the community, please? So I don't think we're going to actually answer that one, but we appreciate the question there.
The answer's Gary.
So I wanted to transition this to maybe talking about specific projects, and I wanted to talk about one, PHPUnit. That seems to be one that gets installed by default on a lot of projects when you start, like, oh, it's got to have tests, install PHPUnit.
Well, I wouldn't say by default. It's getting better. I see more and more companies getting involved into testing, but it's not by default.
Right, not by default. I should probably, yeah, you're right. But yeah, there seems to be a ton of projects that are dependent on specifically PHPUnit. What would you say the bust factor is for PHPUnit, and how do you think that would negatively impact the ecosystem if it were to happen?
I think there's two parts to this. One is that if PHPUnit were to go unmaintained, it's going to be a long time before we go, you know what, it just doesn't work anymore. It's going to continue working for a long, long time, and it's not in production, right? It's something that you're doing locally. It certainly can be part of the continuous integration, all this sort of stuff, right? But yeah, I don't see that the bust factor on that is too critical. It's certainly going to be a slow burn if anything were to happen. And of course, it's not just Sebastian. It is the entire PHPCC group are involved. Stefan Priest and Arne Blankertz and maybe one other person over there also by now. But the trio are, I think, at least tangentially involved in the maintenance, and it's a core part of their business. I think that if if Sebastian did decide that he was going to just go and eat cake for the rest of his life, let's be honest, that could happen. That the company would continue to maintain it. So depending on which scale you're using, I think their bust factor is either 0.33 or 3.
And I think with like PHPUnit, it's important to remember they're built off of a standard. So anything that comes along that's XUnit compatible should be able to fairly easily move over PHPUnit into whatever we go to. So I think they've somewhat mitigated the overall usage of that. But like Davey said, it's going to be a slow burn if that project decides to no longer be maintained, or all three of them decide to buy an island and cash out. So
yeah, and I think that
looking at PHPUnit still, I think it's a project that has a fair amount of community support and people that are pushing for its continued survival. But still, Sebastian has like 4,000 commits on PHPUnit, and like number 2 has maybe 200. Yeah. So, in a practical sense, who really knows that code base?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I will say it's extremely well-written code. I've submitted a patch myself, and it did not take me long to get in and figure things out. And I think that that's a critical part of helping with mitigating the bust factor, is making sure that your project is actually maintainable. As professional developers, anything that we do, potentially we're going to move on from it for one reason or another. And we have a responsibility to make sure that that's as easy as possible. And that's good code, clean code, well-written code. And, we all have the best of intentions. It doesn't always happen, but also documentation around that code. So, why did we make decisions, and why is it written this way, and how, I do think a lot of projects are missing a lot of that kind of reasoning behind it. Maybe we should be adding a reasoning.md or something to our projects, just right alongside the README. This is why this project works this way. And I think even just in general in open source contributions, sometimes you get stuff you have to reject because it doesn't kind of follow the ideology of that project. Putting those things in a document will help a lot of people to contribute and take over when the time comes. So maybe that's just something we should be doing.
I like your point about how just the code was so easy to understand, or not easy necessarily, but like you could see where it was going and it was so well written that increases its bust factor just because other people could take it over, and it's not like this complex system that no one can understand except for the maintainer.
Right.
So maybe as a whole, as a community, we're increasing our bust factor by just simply all coming together and having standards and learning to code better and all this kind of stuff, right?
You want to say increase or decrease?
I know it's confusing. So like when you have a high bus factor, it's good because there's lots of people that can get hit by a bus and it's still fine. But if it's a low bus factor, I had to look it up on Wikipedia. I know. So but it's a low bus factor, you get one person hit by a bus and the whole project is dead. I think that's how it works.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going 1+ is the scale we're using.
Right. Yeah.
So higher numbers is better.
Keeping it simple.
Okay. Yeah. Let's make sure we're all on the same terms.
So we need a whole fleet of buses to take out individual projects.
Someone contact Ariva.
That can be arranged. I mean,
that'll never happen in the United States. We don't have fleets of buses here.
Gary Hawken will be driving it.
Yeah.
So speaking of PHPUnit, if you can, if that kind of fizzles out, and maybe we can just move on to another testing framework. There's lots of testing frameworks out there, and there's lots of different types of testing you can do. But there is one kind of, I guess, elephant in the room, a PHP elephant, that we should probably address. And there's one, I guess, thing that a lot of PHP developers are using that doesn't have an easy replacement. And I don't know. Can you guys think of any of them? Maybe one.
Well, you were going to say Composer, I'm sure, but we have Pair still. It's still a thing. You can all go back to Pair.
The package manager for PHP, the package manager for PHP, Composer, written by none other than Jordi. And what are your all's thoughts on the bus factor behind Composer?
So it's not just Jordi. Let's start there. It's Nils as well. Just throwing that out there. There's two of them.
Yeah. Yes. There's two.
Yeah. So we need to have you have company policies. No more than X% of a team on a plane or at an event. We need to make sure that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's obviously everybody's using Composer. It's responsible for an amazing shift in this community. And Jordi, if you've watched Jordi's keynote that he's been doing recently, he did it at PHP Day, and I think he did it at Tech. He went through burnout. Like, he almost stepped away. We almost lost Jordi from Composer. That's definitely a reality. It's something that can happen. So yeah, we need to fix that.
How?
The question is how? Yeah.
I mean, all I can say is no one's getting it right. I mean, I think the closest cognate to Composer somewhere else would be maybe like NPM, in that it has that package management, and it's used to build so much stuff. And it's the same thing. I mean, if you look at it, there's
Bundler from Ruby actually is very, very similar also.
Right, exactly. I mean, there's one person and maybe kind of a half of another person, and that's it.
So I just learned about RubyTogether.org. You should put that in the show notes. So Ruby Together is a group of people who are leaders on projects. So I think it's Konstantin Hasa, Andre, who's the lead for Sinatra, and the guy behind Travels, actually. And then Andre Akko, who's the guy behind Bundler, and Steve Kalabnik. I don't remember exactly what he does. But they've kind of gotten together with all these big projects, RVM, things like that, and they've come together to try to create a single umbrella organization under which contributions can be made, so fiscal contributions. Because don't forget that one of the reasons people have to stop contributing is because real life gets in the way. They've got to go make money, right? That's a very common reason for projects to lose maintainers. Certainly more common than the bus, the actual bus factor, I think. So that's one of the ways they're helping to solve some of these issues. We don't have that in PHP, and maybe that's something we should look at. We should just shamelessly steal that. I'm sure they'd be fine with it. They're all nice folks, so let's make it a thing.
On the website it says we pool funds on, this is rubytogether.org. We pool funds from corporate and individual members to pay our team to make improvements that benefit everyone who uses Ruby.
Right.
That's cool.
I think that Stefan Komenschap is also doing something similar. That he's setting up a web platform for gathering funds to pay for these kind of open source kind of things.
You're absolutely right. I forget what it's called though.
Yeah, just figure out with Scoop, or is Scoop not in the viewers? Damn him.
So one other thing that also came up at Tech because of this whole thing was the hackathon, right? The project that I can't remember if I came up with the idea or if it was myself and someone else, but I'm going to take credit for it anyways. And the idea was, trying to reduce the bus factor by recruiting or helping match people up with projects that they can work on to try and reduce the bus factor. Because one of the things I think a lot of maintainers don't take the time to do is to kind of take on apprentices and train people up to, cross-train them over their things. And this is something we have to do at companies as well. We have cross-training, making sure that at least one other member on their team knows one other thing than their exact direct responsibility. So everything has at least 2 people on it. And obviously the larger the company, the more you can cross that over. But we're not doing that in open source. And I think there's kind of a weird fallacy that they don't have time. But the idea is that you make up the time later. You double your efficiency by taking on somebody and spending time with them. And so the idea behind this project, Help Wanted, was that you could put in your repo, just like you have a composer.json or readme.md, something like that, a JSON file that detailed what you needed help with, where people could step in and help out. And then we would have an aggregator that you could search through to find projects to work on based on your skill set. So that's something that has not yet been completed. So we need help. Come help us. So that's one way that we can help, is making sure that this idea of mentorship that we have, phpmentoring.org, extends through to actually getting people working on projects.
I was just thinking about phpmentoring.org, so definitely put it in the show notes.
It's probably been in every show notes to date.
Well, it's still not enough.
I mean, going back for a second to the sort of the financial question of open source, I think for the amount of value that these projects can create, there's really an obligation on the part of especially the larger companies that build so much of their infrastructure on top of these open source projects to support these open source authors financially, one way or another. And that doesn't necessarily mean direct payments to them, but it can be paying their own employees to become active contributors in those spaces, because they like, going back to, I'm just going to pick on Jordy all day again, but going back to Composer, it creates a tremendous amount of value, and not to say that he should or shouldn't be rewarded for that. Obviously, I think he should be rewarded for that, but the loss that would be incurred economically if Composer were to just disappear tomorrow would be pretty tremendous. And the cost to invest now to make sure that doesn't happen is fairly small. So,
and especially with Composer, we have Tor in proxy. Like, he has it's not just his open source project, he has created a product with value that he is selling around Composer. The companies should be getting into, if for no other reason than to use the product because it's good. It's not even about supporting the project at that point. It's like, this is a tool, it has value and a cost, you should use it.
Yeah, like the entire... Go ahead.
I was saying, and the more that companies allow, even if they're not giving money back, but they let people work on these open source projects, on the company dollar, that helps reduce, or that helps spread out the bus factor, because I know I've submitted patches to ZF1 when I was using it heavily, because it's like, we see how much this has saved us time, we're going to contribute back to the community and do that work, because we don't want to wait for someone else to do it. But when we can give that back, that helps that community. Then the people working on it understand those bits of the code better. And overall, it helps everybody, because then whoever's the main maintainer will have people by proxy that have worked on it that can step up down the road if that ever happens.
Mm-hmm.
So what about the infrastructure that is kind of running Composer, like all the servers and stuff that turns it into an entire service? Like what goes on behind that to keep that going, right? Like I think it's a lot more than just the code, right? Like you guys were saying.
Right. So my understanding is that packages.org basically runs on one machine. It's really just a kind of proxy to GitHub. And Jordy pays that bill. That bill comes out of Jordy's pocket. And Tor and proxy, basically all of the money that he makes on that, pays that bill. And there is, I think, one other piece of infrastructure that he maintains. I don't remember exactly what for. Maybe the Composer. Getcomposer.org. I think that might be on a separate machine. But I mean, just think about how big the Composer FAR is and how many times we download it. Especially when you look at like continuous integration stuff, where every time you push a build, it's pulling a fresh build of Composer to make sure it's up to date. Continuous deployment. I know that on Engine Yard, we fairly regularly pull down, like we do a self-update kind of thing. So yeah, I mean these are not insignificant numbers. It's not an insignificant amount of traffic, and Jordy's paying for that himself, which it should not be.
Yeah.
So what should we do to change that, though? I mean, is there something we can do? I mean, like, can we come together as a community and be like, okay, this is our nonprofit that we're going to start to that's good for the community and it pays for all the bills of the things that we run, or like, what's the idea?
The minimum that we can do is that we all buy a license of the torrent proxy, even though Jordy says it's free for open source projects. I mean, I told him use a donate button, but he says, yeah, it's not going to work. So buying torrent proxy will definitely pay the bills. And if everyone that's how many viewers you have right now?
How many what?
How many viewers at this moment?
Oh, 13. 13.
Oh, okay. Well, if all these 13 plus us buy a license right after this show, yeah, he can have a dedicated host for another month.
True.
Yeah, I mean, we do as a community have to support the projects that help us build. You know, we take. I mean, it's also one of those things. Like, if you are pushing out open source code, that is also your contribution back to the community. You know, we have to be aware that. You know, just because you use Composer doesn't mean you're not contributing back to it. If you are putting open source code out using Composer as part of your distribution mechanism, you may feel like you've already done your part. But for the good of your project, if you want to make sure that the health of your project is maintained and you value, you know, Composer or PHPUnit or whatever, then any money you can spare or time is beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes down to it, it is a pretty simple financial equation, and you know, it's like I was saying, especially for the kind of the larger companies out there. I mean, they're creating a ton of value on these projects, and you know, the amount of money that we're talking about is not tremendous. I mean, I don't remember off the top of my head what like the cost of the business license for torrent proxy was.
Well, they have a supporter. I just checked. They have like a supporter license. You pay like $5 to $10 a month, depending on the Swiss franc currency level.
Yeah, supporters $10 US and businesses 15 per developer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean, that's nothing.
It's not even expensive.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about like the per seat license of something that like Jira that every big company uses, or things that are like that, I mean, the $10 or $15 is absolutely nothing in that scope.
Well, so I'm gonna change subjects real quick because Tom Anderson on Twitter asked, which projects/frameworks would you like to see go under the bus? So there's a lot of like negative energy coming for like, let's throw some stuff under the bus. So I appreciate the question, Tom, but I don't know if we'll answer that one because it's more about like it's about community. It's like, hey, like we all
don't want
contribute
things to go under the bus.
right?
We want to keep them alive.
We want to keep them alive. There's a big community out there, so you know, the more projects, the better, I guess. I don't know. That's got pros and cons to it as well.
Well, I mean, every project. I mean, not all of them are going to be successful. Not all of them are going to be great, but they all have the capacity to inform something else. So,
for sure,
there's definitely value there.
I want to kind of start wrapping it up and kind of point the finger, or the focus, I should say, more towards PHP internals and its bus factor, because there seems to be quite a bit of tribal knowledge, if you will, surrounding PHP internals. Not so much maybe as a whole, but I feel like it's a bit segregated, and there's a lot of people who know very specifically about a very specific part of PHP, and they know about their one extension that they maintain, or their or this one process, or how maybe just recently I added some documentation, and there was a lot of information just kind of scattered all over the internet. So I ended up writing a blog that just kind of write a step-by-step guide on how to contribute to the docs. But even in that, there's so much that only very few people know. Like, how do the docs? What is the servers that run to make sure that the docs get converted from the docbook XML markup into get mirrored onto PHP.net, which gets mirrored onto the mirrors, and like that whole system, like how many people are in control of that? And I feel like there's a lot of little islands of tribal knowledge there. What are your all's thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's a serious problem. I mean, as far as I know, PDO still doesn't have an actual maintainer.
Yeah.
And how many people use
changed in the last couple of months now?
So even with a thriving community, there's and I don't know that this is specific to PHP, but you get, the PDO bus factor is, really, really low, because as far as I know, it's 0. Like, we can patch it, but we're not doing any major work on it because nobody's in control of it. And then you have some areas that are very heavily trafficked and worked on very much. So it's a very serious problem that we do need to get figured out and fixed. So if someone would like to maintain PDO, that'd be great. Because much like Composer, we should all be using it.
Well, at least there's a viable alternative with MySQL, which Oracle Johans does seem to have some sort of handle on.
If you use MySQL.
Sure.
Yeah.
Doesn't everybody?
No, but I mean, when you think, I mean, it's scary that PDO is I mean, it's one of those situations. Obviously, it hasn't broken yet, and there's enough knowledge out there to kind of keep it limping along. But how long until that sort of delta between where the databases are going? They're all being actively developed. So you just look at MySQL and the non-Oracle owned variants thereof, and Postgres and stuff. They're all under active development. So at what point does PDO stop working? Or does PDO start breaking down at the edges? Because it's not just going to fail one day. But how far is that away? Is that a year? Is that 2 years? 5 years? How much infrastructure is built on PDO? I mean, it's shocking to think about it.
I think it is a little bit more likely with MySQL, which is what everyone uses because of the factor in the communities over there with Maria, Percona, and Oracle, and I think one other that I'm forgetting. Those are getting further and further apart, and that's not going to change.
Well, then that expands as well to, say, PHP has a lot of C wrappers for libraries. For example, EmCrypt is a library that is not specifically for PHP, but it is a package that has no maintainer anymore, as I understand, right? Like, it is not being maintained, EmCrypt, and it's an extension. So that affects PHP. So like, how should we deal with that as a community? Just deprecate the EmCrypt functions and push for something else, or?
I mean, I think that's, I mean, part of the big thing that EmCrypt was doing was, password hashing, and that's sort of been moved into, moved out of that area. But still, I mean, if you're doing any kind of encryption, like actual encryption, like what are your options in PHP?
Right, not many, right?
Nope.
No, and like if you, I mean, we're moving, not to sound like a buzzword factory, but I mean we're moving into more of a cloud-based world. Security departments and auditors are looking. You start hearing more and more. At least, like I mean, in the enterprise world, you start to hear more and more about encrypting data at rest and stuff like that. So actually being able to securely encrypt data that's being stored on storage devices that you don't maintain. That's kind of entered into the enterprise, risk analysis mindset. So we need to have tools that let us do that in an effective way.
And those tools are very, very hard to build. So you don't want to just say, well, we'll build encryption in house, because then it's not going to work. No. EmCrypt is good at what it does, but if no one's maintaining it, that's a bus factor for that portion of PHP. Is if EmCrypt goes away, which it kind of, since it's not being updated, it kind of is in that sunset period. What do you do? And just like going way back to the beginning of this podcast when we talked about just frameworks, you've got to sit down and you've got to look at what do we do to change this? Either we maintain it ourselves, or we switch to something else, or it's something that we have this problem all along the stack. It's not just at the framework level. It's not just at the C library level.
Can I ask a question? Isn't it also that the community forms around a specific need that is required within the community? So if, let's say, EmCrypt dies off into a non-maintained project, will it not be that the community creates a new version of the EmCrypt library in order to continue where the original project has left off? I mean, we have seen so many forks in the past.
I think it's important to remember, don't do it yourself.
Encryption is something that you don't want to do, but when you have a whole bunch of encryption, I mean, I talked to Anthony, and he says, well, you need to find these security guys in order to understand all encryption things.
As a community, we do not have the tribal knowledge to maintain another fork or implementation of something like EmCrypt. We just don't. And all that we can do is reach out, and maybe a company would be willing to pay for that because they need it and open source it. That would probably be, maybe that's a Facebook, maybe we'll see them doing it. But that's really the only options that we have specifically for EmCrypt. Now for everything else, I can certainly see that being the case, but EmCrypt is kind of a special case.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do it yourself.
Good security advice. So I do want to start wrapping it up a little bit here. So is there any kind of final words that we can kind of take from this discussion to what can we do as community contributors to help raise the bus factor in just both PHP internals and all the packages and composers? Is there like a summary bullet list that we can just kind of hit?
Well, there is no silver bullet in this kind of situations. I mean, you need to look at the projects, as we discussed, PHPUnit. If Sebastian decides he's going to eat cake the rest of his time, so be it. People will still be able to use PHPUnit. In the trend of Composer, the versions of Composer everyone has installed, it will continue to work. Things like security updates or required bug fixes, that's going to be a difficult thing to challenge. So as long as something is working, it will be okay. The moment that you hit complexity challenges, it will not. How can you start working in preventing this? Is first of all support the maintainers. Either you provide them with some cash, so they can spend some more of their free time working on these projects. Or you can provide like, okay, listen, I'm going to help you with this. Start looking at the small contributions you can make. Look at the documentation. Look at the source code. Look at the issue list. Most of the issues are easy to pick up and start fixing it. The way I learned coding is I went to an issue tracker and started fixing bugs. I took small bugs first and then the more complex things. And this is a good way to learn the inner workings of an application. Whether it's Composer, whether it's a framework, or like Zen framework, or it is a tool. I don't want to say EmCrypt, nothing like that. But yeah, I mean, we even did the PHP Test Fest. We learned to test the PHP core code, which is, C kind of things. This is something that we're not familiar with, but we were still able to do this. You will learn to understand the underlying project. And this will give you a better position if you want to continue where someone has left off, you want to improve the application, or you want to add new features to the project. You are able to do so in the mindset and the ideology of the project maintainer.
I think it's critical to realize if you are using a project commercially, you owe it to your company and your team to, from the very beginning, once you've made that decision, to decide that you are a maintainer for this project. And that is either going to happen while that project is being maintained and you can kind of get into a relationship with those maintainers and learn from them, or you're going to be in a crisis project where that bus factor hits 0 and you're screwed. So, work with talk to your company, tell them this, let them know that it is their responsibility to become part maintainers of this project, so that should the worst happen, that they can become maintainers moving forward and not get screwed. If you're an open source user of these projects, then just continue being open source. Continue using them, contribute as you can. You know what that means. If you're open source, you already get what that means. Yeah.
And I think if you're a project maintainer or library maintainer, be open to people wanting to help.
Yes.
Try to make sure your documentation is good for at least the heaviest parts, heaviest used parts of your application. Don't just throw projects at the wall and say, well, there you go, and then not accept patches or help from other people. Yeah. Because even if right now you don't need help, a year, 2 years down the road, you may need help. And the more people that get in early and you allow to help will greatly reduce or increase the bus factor, so that you can go away for 6 months, a year.
Yeah.
That's going to be left in good hands.
Make sure you have a contributions.md. GitHub will pick that out when you go to do a pull request, and that should not just be the rules of contributing, that should also be the help for contributing. Have documentation for potential maintainers. Say, hey, we know you're using our project. Nobody starts maintaining an open source project if they're not already using it. So you need to remember that they are users and ramp them up from there. Every single user is a potential future contributor. So this was actually mentioned by Andre Alco at MagmaConf last week. Make sure you have documentation that is specifically for those people to understand how the project works, the technical things that go into it, and how to get on board with being a contributor. That is your responsibility as a project maintainer. And mentor. Get people in there. And write better code. I mean, the code quality is not just about bug-free code. It is about maintainability, and that's important for the bus factor too.
Yeah, I mean, if you're working in a more corporate environment, you make the case to your team lead or your manager or your director. Let them understand there is an economic case there, and that the cost of contributing should be baked into their budgets. Most of the time there is some flexibility in those budgets. It's the same way that you kind of, it's the same argument, the economic argument you make to bring testing into your environment. It's we need some percentage of our time to work on testing. We need some percentage of the time understood that it's going to be contributing back to the framework that we're using, or this important library. I mean, like if you have some amazing SOA project that you're working on and it's all built on Guzzle, well, give Guzzle 1 or 2% of your time. They will appreciate it.
I mean, I think you've made the evaluations. You understand why you're choosing the project because it's going to save you time. You must know how much time. Take a fraction of that, 10, 20%, and choose to put it back. So now you only save 80% of your time, but that's still a huge amount of time saving.
Exactly.
So just factor that into the cost of making that decision, using that project.
Well, we've been talking about a lot of developers and a lot of people who have contributed a lot to the community, and I think it's a good transition to move on into the developer shout-out, which I love this segment because it recognizes the great people in the community. I send them a handwritten thank you card and a little gift, and the gift is sponsored by Laracast.com, and it's a $50 Amazon gift card. And Laracast, if you don't know, is the Netflix for developers. And if you're watching the PHP Roundtable or listening to it to learn more about PHP, well, then you're going to love Laracast because it's all about step-by-step instructions, screencasts of how to do really cool things in PHP. And I'm personally a subscriber, and I've learned tons from Jeffrey Way, the guy who runs it. So definitely check out Laracast.com. And for this episode, the panel nominated Derek Rethens as the developer shout-out. So why did you guys nominate Derek?
He's a bus factor.
Yes.
Yeah, we basically need date time to keep working.
Xdebug to keep working.
Xdebug needs to keep working.
Yeah. Especially since date time is now in PHP INI requirements. So.
Yeah, I mean, Derek has, over the years, he's contributed a lot. We discussed earlier, he was the release manager for several, including the last PHP 4 release. And he's just been a long-term contributor to internals. And I think without him, we wouldn't have PHP 5.3, and therefore we wouldn't have PHP 7 or anything past that. So Derek's an awesome person who does a lot for this community.
Yeah. Thank you, Derek.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and Derek, I will be getting in contact with you shortly about getting your snail mail address so I can get this thank you card in the mail to you. And finally, I just want to wrap this up with some shameless plugs, and we could just go down the line, maybe starting with Samantha. Do you have anything that you would like to shamelessly promote?
I have really nothing to shamelessly promote. There's some really cool, like around the country, some Women Who Code and Girl Develop It stuff, at least in the Mid-Atlantic region. So definitely check it out. There's some really cool groups that need your help. So.
What is it?
Girl Develop It and Women Who Code. These are some organizations that are trying to just support women in the industry. So they're a really cool local groups, and they need help. So.
Awesome.
Check them out.
Great. What about Davey? Do you have anything?
So I have 3 things. I'll be real quick. We talked about security. So if you are doing passwords and stuff like that, securepasswords.info. It's polyglot. It's multi-framework. If you are using a framework or a language that is not yet listed, please contribute that back. It's just a resource for basically using bcrypt in as many ways as possible. PHPUnit.org, just to be a little more specific than Samantha's suggestions, and MHPrompt.org, the mental health and technology initiative that I'm part of. So securepasswords.info, PHPUnit.org, MHPrompt.org.
Nice. What about you, Chris? You got anything?
I've got 2 things that we've already mentioned at phpmentoring.org. If you are looking to be an apprentice to somebody, or you'd like to help get apprentices for your project, phpmentoring.org. We hopefully will have our new matching stuff done within the next couple of weeks. And then if you're looking for a project to commit to, that we do have Sculpin, which is a static site generator, which I help a little bit with. But we're very open to new people coming in and learning the system and helping us out.
Awesome. And Michelangelo, do you got stuff?
Well, Chris hijacked it. phpmentoring.org is definitely the place you want to go to if you're looking to level up. Even if you're a senior developer, there's still stuff that you probably haven't touched with. phpmentoring.org will be able to lift you up to that new level. I mean, it's great to pass around ideas and skills. I love being a mentor and a mentee. So yeah, that's one thing. A second thing, if you happen to be in the Amsterdam region this week, there is this Dutch PHP conference going on there. It's one of the best PHP conferences here in Europe. So if you're in Europe, go visit Amsterdam Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Definitely be there. And otherwise, in January, we have PHP Benelux conference, same time, same place in Antwerp. Great stuff, great sessions. We have great social events. Davey can confirm this. So yeah, it's awesome. We do things good here in Europe.
The right way. Nice. Cool. So our next episode is becoming a PHP entrepreneur, which actually Michelangelo is coming back for round 2, back-to-back episodes. So it'll be Michelangelo and a couple other people on talking about. We're taking that concept from the episode where we talked about the business of PHP. We're going to talk about some more specifics and dive a little deeper on doing entrepreneurial things as a PHP nerd. Also, if you have something you'd like to share about on the PHP Roundtable, you've got a topic you'd like to see discussed or you'd like to be on the panel, hit me up on Twitter. I'm Sammy K. You can also ping PHP Roundtable on Twitter. That's also me. I'd just like to thank Samantha, Davey, Chris, and Michelangelo for joining us for this awesome discussion, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye, Internet.
Thanks for having me.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.